in the silent corridors of the Apostolic Palace, where each millenary stone guards secrets of centuries, there exists a circle of power that few know, and of which even fewer dare to speak. Behind the most transcendental decisions of Pope Leo XIV, a select group of advisors operates in the shadows, influencing the course of the Catholic Church in ways the world would never imagine. The history of this secret circle dates back to the first days of Leo XIV's pontificate, when then Cardinal Giuseppe Torretti was elected Pope in the 2023 conclave. Few knew that he had already begun to form a team of advisors that would transcend the traditional structures of the Roman Curia. This group, known internally as Il Cenacolo. The Cenacle became the true engine of the most audacious reforms of his pontificate. The original nucleus of the circle was composed of 5 key figures, each specialized in a specific area of papal administration. The first of them was Cardinal Pietro Parolin II, Secretary of State, who had inherited not only the position, but also the international network of contacts from his predecessor. His influence extended far beyond Vatican diplomacy, reaching the most exclusive circles of international politics and global finance. The second central figure was Dr. Maria Elena Vázquez, a Spanish canonist who had arrived at the Vatican as an external consultant, but had quickly become one of the most listened to voices by Leo XIV. Her specialization in liturgical canon law had positioned her as the intellectual architect behind the controversial Apostolic Constitution, Liturgia Unitatis. Vázquez operated from a discreet office on the 3rd floor of the Apostolic Palace, where she received theologians and liturgists from around the world who sought to influence papal decisions. The third member of the circle was Monsignor Alessandro Gisotti, a Vatican diplomat of barely 45 years, who had risen meteorically in the ecclesiastical hierarchy thanks to his ability to navigate the complex waters of international politics. Gisotti had been the architect of the Vatican strategy to improve relations with China, and his influence on the Pope's foreign policy decisions was considered decisive by those who knew the ins and outs of Vatican power. The fourth key figure was Father Benedetto Mariani, an Italian Jesuit specialized in communications who had revolutionized the Vatican's media strategy. Mariani had understood before anyone else the importance of social networks and digital media for modern evangelization, and had managed to make Leo XIV the most followed pope on digital platforms in history. His office, located in the basements of the Apostolic Palace, functioned as a media operations center that constantly monitored public perception of the pontificate. The fifth and most mysterious member of the circle was Cardinal Emmanuel Nkomo, an African theologian whose influence transcended his official position as prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples. Nkomo had been Leo XIV's spiritual mentor during his years as cardinal and maintained with him a relationship of trust that few managed to understand. His private conversations with the Pope, which took place every Tuesday afternoon in the Vatican Gardens, were considered by many as the moments when the most important decisions of the pontificate were made. The functioning dynamics of Il Cenacolo were complex and sophisticated. The 5 members met formally every Friday morning in a reserved room of the Apostolic Palace, but their true deliberations took place in informal encounters that extended throughout the week. Each of them maintained their own network of informants and collaborators, creating an intelligence system that rivaled that of many national governments. The decision-making process within the circle followed an unwritten but strictly respected protocol. Important proposals were first discussed in bilateral sessions between members, then presented to the complete group for analysis, and finally brought to the Pope with a consensual recommendation. Leo XIV rarely rejected proposals that arrived with the unanimous backing of Il Cenacolo, which had led some critics to suggest that the true power in the Vatican resided in this group rather than in the pontiff himself. The circle's influence had become evident in several controversial decisions of the pontificate. The decision to create the new, unitive form of Eucharistic celebration had been gestated in the group's secret meetings for months before being announced publicly. The strategy to handle the crisis with Cardinal Zen in Hong Kong had also been designed by Il Cenacolo, which had managed to transform a potential rupture into an opportunity for reconciliation. However, the power of the secret circle was not limited to liturgical or disciplinary matters. Its influence extended to Vatican finances, where they had implemented reforms that had transformed the economic management of the Holy See. Cardinal Parolin had led a complete reorganization of papal investments, moving them away from controversial sectors like the arms industry and orienting them toward sustainable development and social justice projects. Dr. Vasquez had been the mind behind a series of reforms in canon law that had modernized fundamental aspects of ecclesiastical legislation. Her work had been particularly influential in revising procedures for sexual abuse cases, where she had managed to balance the need for justice with the protection of the rights of all parties involved. Monsignor Gisotti had revolutionized Vatican diplomacy, establishing direct communication channels with world leaders that had allowed the Pope to intervene in international conflicts more effectively than any of his predecessors. His network of contacts extended from the presidential palaces of Latin America to European chancelleries and Asian power centers. Father Mariani had transformed papal communication, creating a media strategy that had managed to make Leo XIV's messages reach audiences that had traditionally been distant from the Church. His work had been fundamental to the success of initiatives like the global campaign against climate change, led by the Pope, which had mobilized millions of Catholics worldwide. Cardinal Nkomo had been the architect of a silent but profound theological renewal, which had reoriented the Church's pastoral approach toward greater inclusion of non-Western cultures. His influence had been decisive in Leo XIV's decision to canonize several African and Asian martyrs, sending a clear message about the universality of Catholicism. The existence of Il Cenacolo was not completely secret within the Vatican. Many members of the Roman Curia knew of the special influence these five figures had over the Pope, but few understood the true extent of their power. Some cardinals had attempted to gain access to the circle, but their efforts had been unsuccessful. The mutual loyalty between the group's members and their personal devotion to Leo XIV created an impenetrable barrier for outsiders. The influence of Il Cenacolo extended far beyond the Vatican walls, reaching international networks of power that few suspected. Each member of the secret circle had cultivated strategic relationships for years that now served the interests of Leo XIV's pontificate in ways that transcended traditional diplomacy. These connections had converted the group into a geopolitical force whose reach rivaled that of major world powers. Cardinal Parolin had established direct links with the main European central banks through his personal relationship with Christine Lagarde, president of the European Central Bank. This connection had allowed the Vatican to influence economic policies that affected millions of Catholics throughout the continent. During the financial crises of 2024, Parolin had managed to get the ECB to adopt special measures to protect religious institutions' investments, an intervention that had gone unnoticed by the press, but had saved millions of euros in ecclesiastical assets. Parolin's network of contacts also extended to the technology world, where he had established a strategic alliance with several Silicon Valley CEOs. These relationships had resulted in confidential agreements that allowed the Vatican to access advanced communication technologies and artificial intelligence systems that improved the efficiency of papal administration. Collaboration with companies like Google and Microsoft had been fundamental for developing the digital platform Vatican Connect, which had revolutionized the way Catholics worldwide interacted with the Holy See. Dr. Vasquez had built her own network of influence in the international academic world. Her relationship with rectors of the world's main Catholic universities had allowed her to create an informal system of theological consultation that functioned as an academic senate for the Pope. When Leo XIV needed advice on complex doctrinal questions, Vasquez could convene in a matter of hours the world's best theologians for virtual consultation sessions that developed in absolute secrecy. This academic network had been fundamental in elaborating Liturgia Unitatis. Vasquez had coordinated a consultation process that had involved more than 200 liturgy specialists from 6 continents, all working under strict confidentiality agreements. The result had been a document that, although controversial, had a solid academic foundation that had surprised even its most severe critics. Monsignor Gisotti had developed what many considered the most sophisticated intelligence network of the modern Vatican. His contacts in intelligence services from various countries provided him with information that often reached the Pope before many heads of state. This capacity for anticipation had allowed Leo XIV to intervene in international crises with an effectiveness that had astonished the world diplomatic community. Ghisotti's network included agents in places as diverse as British Secret Services, the American CIA, Israeli Mossad, and Chinese intelligence services. This diversity of sources allowed him to obtain multiple perspectives on international conflicts, which had converted the Vatican into a more effective mediator than many official international organizations. His role in the secret negotiations that had led to the truce in the Ukraine conflict had been privately recognized by several world leaders, although it had never been publicly revealed. Father Mariani had revolutionized not only Vatican communication, but also the way the Catholic Church related to world public opinion. His network included journalists, digital influencers, Hollywood producers, and media executives who worked coordinatedly to amplify papal messages. This media operation had managed to make Leo XIV the most visible and influential religious leader of the digital era. Mariani's strategy had included creating multimedia content on multiple platforms, from Netflix documentaries to specialized podcasts and social media campaigns that had reached audiences of hundreds of millions of people. His work had been fundamental to the success of papal initiatives like the Laudato Si 2.0 campaign, which had mobilized young Catholics worldwide in concrete actions against climate change. Cardinal Nkomo had built the most extensive and perhaps most influential network of all. His connections in Africa, Asia, and Oceania had converted the Vatican into a key actor in global South development. Through his network of bishops, missionaries, and lay leaders, Nkomo had established development programs that competed in effectiveness with United Nations and World Bank initiatives. Nkomo's influence also extended to the world of international cooperation, where he had established strategic alliances with philanthropic foundations like the Gates Foundation and Ford Foundation. These collaborations had resulted in joint programs of public health education and sustainable development that had improved living conditions for millions of people in the world's poorest countries. The coordinated functioning of these 5 networks had created a power system that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. When the Pope needed to influence an important political decision, the system activated like a perfectly synchronized machine. Parolin mobilized his economic and political contacts. Vasquez provided theological and canonical justification. Gisotti activated his intelligence sources. Mariani launched the corresponding media campaign, and Nkomo secured support from local churches in affected countries. The system had demonstrated its effectiveness on numerous occasions. During the European migration crisis of 2024, Il Cenacolo had managed to coordinate a response that had involved governments, international organizations, media, and local churches so effectively that it had completely changed the public narrative about immigration. The intervention had resulted in more humane policies and a significant increase in public support for refugees. However, the power of Il Cenacolo was not without internal controversies. The different personalities and approaches of its members sometimes generated tensions that required the Pope's personal intervention to be resolved. The relationship between Vasquez and Nkomo had been particularly tense during the elaboration of Liturgia Unitatis, as their visions about liturgical enculturation differed significantly. These tensions had led Leo XIV to establish a conflict resolution protocol within the group. When irreconcilable disagreements arose, the Pope convened private sessions with the conflicting members, acting as mediator until achieving consensus. This process had strengthened the group's cohesion and had demonstrated the pontiff's leadership skills. The operational security of Il Cenacolo was a constant concern. The group had developed encrypted communication protocols and meeting systems that guaranteed the confidentiality of their deliberations. The most sensitive meetings took place in rotating locations within the Vatican, and participants used verbal codes that changed regularly to refer to delicate topics. The existence of this secret circle had generated speculation and conspiracy theories in various media. Some investigative journalists had attempted to infiltrate the network or identify its members, but the group's discipline and their experience in security operations had frustrated these attempts. The few leaks that had occurred had been quickly denied or minimized through Mariani's media network. The true dimension of Il Cenacolo's power had been revealed during the Cardinal Zen crisis in Hong Kong, when the group had demonstrated its capacity to handle a situation that threatened to fragment the Catholic Church. The secret circle's coordinated response had transformed what could have been a schism into an opportunity to strengthen papal authority, showing a level of strategic sophistication that had surprised even experienced Vatican observers. The crisis management had begun before Cardinal Zen publicly announced his intention to celebrate the traditional Mass. Ghesotti's intelligence systems had detected the first signs of the Hong Kong Cardinals' rebellion through communication interceptions and field agent reports. This early information had allowed the group to prepare a response strategy that included multiple scenarios and contingency options. Dr. Vasquez had been tasked with preparing canonical justification for any disciplinary action that might be necessary. Her analysis had identified historical precedents that allowed the Pope to act firmly without resorting to extreme sanctions that could generate martyrs in the traditionalist movement. Her work had been fundamental in finding the perfect balance between authority and mercy that had characterized the papal response. Simultaneously, Father Mariani had developed a media strategy that had managed to control the public narrative about the crisis. Through his network of contacts in international media, he had ensured that event coverage focused on reconciliation and dialogue aspects, rather than conflict and division. His work had included coordinating exclusive interviews with experts favorable to the papal position and strategic distribution of information that had influenced public perception of the event. Cardinal Nkomo had mobilized his network in Asia to ensure that bishops in the region expressed their support for Leo XIV during the crisis. His intervention had been crucial in preventing other prelates from following Zen's example, which could have triggered a broader rebellion. Support statements that had arrived from Manila, Seoul, Tokyo, and other Asian capitals had been carefully coordinated by Nkomo to maximize their media and political impact. Cardinal Parolin had used his diplomatic contacts to ensure that Western governments did not interpret the crisis as a sign of papal weakness. His private conversations with ambassadors and foreign ministers had managed to maintain church-state relations stability during a particularly delicate moment. His work had been especially important in countries with large Catholic populations, where the perception of internal division could have affected the Church's political influence. The coordination between the five circle members during the crisis had been an example of organizational efficiency that had impressed even Leo XIV. Daily meetings of the group during the critical week had allowed adjusting strategy in real time, responding to unexpected developments and taking advantage of opportunities that arose on the fly. This adaptation capacity had been fundamental to the operation's success. The most delicate moment had arrived when Cardinal Zen had accepted the papal invitation for an audience in Rome. Il Cenacolo had meticulously prepared this encounter, designing choreography that would allow both parties to save dignity while reaffirming papal authority. The choice of July 25th, Feast of St. James the Apostle, had been Vasquez's suggestion, who had identified the appropriate symbolism of a saint who had been both missionary and martyr. Leo XIV's preparation for the audience had included advisory sessions with each circle member. Parolin had provided diplomatic context. Vasquez had prepared canonical arguments. Gisotti had briefed on security implications. Mariani had designed post-encounter communication strategy, and Nkomo had offered pastoral perspectives on how to handle the conflict's spiritual dimension. The audience's success had consolidated Il Cenacolo's reputation as the true center of pontificate power. The joint declaration that had resulted from the encounter had been drafted by the group weeks in advance, with multiple versions prepared for different possible scenarios. The final version had managed to satisfy both traditionalists and progressives, a diplomatic feat that had required deep understanding of both groups' sensibilities. However, the secret circle's power had begun to generate resistance within the Roman Curia itself. Several cardinals had privately expressed their concern about influence concentration in such a small group, arguing that the situation weakened traditional ecclesiastical government structures. These criticisms had reached Leo XIV's ears, who had begun to consider the need for reforms that would formally legitimize his closest advisor's role. The Pope's response to these concerns had been characteristic of his leadership style. Instead of dissolving the group or reducing its influence, he had decided to partially institutionalize it. In a decision that had surprised many Vatican observers, Leo XIV had announced the creation of the Pontifical Council for Pastoral Coordination, a new organism that would formalize some of the functions that Il Cenacolo had been performing informally. This partial institutionalization had been a brilliant maneuver that had achieved several objectives simultaneously. On one hand, it had provided a response to criticisms about lack of transparency in the papal decision-making process. On the other hand, it had allowed the secret circle to continue operating in the shadows while creating a public facade that satisfied formal procedure expectations. The new council included the 5 Il Cenacolo members along with other prelates and laypeople who served as a kind of screen for the group's true operations. Formal council meetings were held monthly, and their minutes were distributed to the Roman Curia, but real decisions continued to be made in the original circle's secret meetings. This strategy had demonstrated the group's political sophistication and its capacity to adapt to external pressures without compromising its operational effectiveness. The council's creation had been presented as a democratizing reform, but in reality had strengthened Il Cenacolo's position by providing it with institutional legitimacy it had not previously possessed. The circle's influence had also extended to the selection of new bishops and cardinals. Through an informal consultation process, Il Cenacolo members had begun to influence appointment decisions, ensuring that new prelates were compatible with Leo XIV's pastoral vision. This influence had been particularly notable in recent cardinal elevations, where several of the new cardinals had been recommended by circle members. The selection process had involved exhaustive evaluations of potential candidates, including analyses of their theological positions, administrative capacities, personal loyalty to the Pope, and compatibility with pontificate strategic objectives. These evaluations had been coordinated by Gisotti, who had used his intelligence network to obtain detailed information about each candidate. Il Cenacolo's power consolidation had reached its culmination during preparation for the next conclave, an event that was still on the distant horizon but already occupied the secret circle's strategic minds. Although Leo XIV enjoyed excellent health at 72 years old, group members had discreetly begun planning papal succession, a task that required long-term vision and deep understanding of ecclesiastical power dynamics. Cardinal Parolin had been tasked with mapping existing cardinal alliances and identifying possible papal candidates who could continue Leo XIV's pastoral line. His analysis had revealed that the power balance within the College of Cardinals had changed significantly during the current pontificate, with a growing majority of cardinals who had been appointed by Leo XIV and who therefore shared his reformist vision. This preparation work had included creating detailed profiles of each cardinal, elector documents that contained information about their theological positions, political alliances, personal strengths and weaknesses. These profiles were regularly updated by Gisotti's intelligence network and constituted an invaluable database for any future succession strategy. Dr. Vasquez had contributed to this effort by preparing canonical analyses about conclave procedures and identifying possible reforms that could be implemented to ensure that the next pope would be elected according to principles that favored pastoral continuity. Her work had included proposals to modify voting rules and deliberation procedures that could be presented as technical reforms, but would have significant strategic implications. Father Mariani had developed communication strategies for different succession scenarios, preparing media narratives that could be activated depending on who emerged as the circle's favorite candidate. His work had included identifying journalists and media that could be influenced to support the preferred candidate, as well as strategies to neutralize negative coverage of unwanted candidates. Cardinal Nkomo had used his extensive network in the Global South to build support coalitions among cardinals from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. His work had been fundamental in ensuring that the next papal election would reflect the demographic reality of the modern Catholic Church, where the majority of faithful resided outside Europe and North America. However, succession planning had also revealed the limitations of Il Cenacolo's power. Despite its considerable influence, the circle could not completely control the papal election process, which depended on unpredictable factors like conclave dynamics, last-minute alliances, and the intervention of the Holy Spirit in which all cardinals claimed to sincerely believe. This reality had led the group to develop more subtle strategies focused on creating favorable conditions for their objectives, rather than attempting to directly control the outcome. These strategies included promoting certain cardinals to positions of greater visibility, organizing events that allowed favorite candidates to demonstrate their leadership capabilities, and creating theological and pastoral narratives that favored the type of pope the circle considered desirable. Il Cenacolo's influence had also extended to planning the pontificate's great events. Preparation for the 2025 Jubilee had been coordinated by the circle, which had seen in this celebration a unique opportunity to consolidate Leo XIV's legacy and demonstrate the effectiveness of his reforms. Every aspect of the Jubilee, from theme selection to event logistics, had been carefully planned to maximize pastoral and media impact. The Jubilee's success had reinforced the circle's position within the Vatican and had demonstrated its capacity to execute large-scale projects with efficiency that had impressed even skeptical critics. The millions of pilgrims who had visited Rome during the Jubilee year had witnessed a renewed and dynamic church, an image that had been carefully cultivated by Mariani's media strategy. However, Il Cenacolo's growing power had begun to generate adverse reactions outside the Vatican. Several governments had privately expressed their concern about the circle's influence on papal decisions, especially in matters affecting their national interests. These concerns had led some countries to develop their own strategies to influence the Vatican, creating complex geopolitical competition around the Holy See. The Circle's response to these external pressures had been characteristic of their strategic sophistication. Instead of directly confronting concerned governments, they had developed parallel communication channels that allowed dialogue without compromising papal independence. These channels included informal meetings between Circle members and government representatives, as well as the use of trusted intermediaries to transmit sensitive messages. Il Cenacolo's future depended largely on its capacity to adapt to a changing environment without losing its operational effectiveness. Circle members were aware that their current influence was intimately linked to Leo XIV's person, and that any change in the pontificate could dramatically alter their position. This reality had led the group to develop institutional survival strategies that transcended individual personalities. One of these strategies had been creating a new generation of ecclesiastical leaders who shared the Circle's vision and who could continue their work in the future. Through discrete formation programs and mentoring opportunities, Il Cenacolo members had begun preparing potential successors who could keep their influence alive in future pontificates. The evaluation of Il Cenacolo's impact on Leo XIV's pontificate revealed a profound transformation in the way papal power was exercised. The Circle had managed to create a more efficient and coordinated ecclesiastical government system, but it also concentrated an unprecedented amount of power in the hands of a very small group of individuals. This concentration had generated impressive results in terms of pastoral and diplomatic effectiveness, but had also raised important questions about transparency and accountability in church government. Il Cenacolo's legacy would probably be evaluated by future historians as one of the most significant developments in the evolution of the modern papacy. The Circle had demonstrated that it was possible to combine the Pope's traditional authority with modern methods of strategic management and communication, creating a model of ecclesiastical leadership that could influence future pontificates for decades. However, the true test of the Circle's success would come with time, when it could be evaluated whether the reforms and changes implemented during Leo XIV's pontificate had truly strengthened the Catholic Church or had created new problems that future generations would have to resolve. For now, Il Cenacolo continued operating in the shadows of Vatican power, silently influencing decisions that affected the lives of more than 1 billion Catholics worldwide. The history of the secret circle remained largely hidden from the general public, but its influence was undeniable for those who knew the true mechanisms of papal power. In the corridors of the Apostolic Palace, where the Catholic Church's most important decisions continued to be made in discreet meetings and private conversations, Il Cenacolo had established a new paradigm of ecclesiastical government that would define the future of the world's oldest and most powerful religious institution.